You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 55th episode of the Warp Core podcast, our continuing mission to talk through all of Star Trek. As you may have seen in our introduction video, if you're paying attention to that Commodore 64 video, I have to say we have boldly gone through quite a bit of the original series. I believe this is the 16th episode of Season 2. And we are looking at a future of Trek ahead of us. But today, gentlemen, we talk the Gamesters of Triskelion. Probably one of the more famous episodes, at least visually. I think a lot of people will identify if you looked at the thumbnail of our video here on YouTube. I think it's quite recognizable. But we have a lot to talk about with this episode. Perhaps to the contrary of the last episode here on Warp Core 54, where we talked the penultimate Star Trek episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. And while that episode was no tribble at all, Fert Derby, take us away with the trouble that this episode may have.
Thank you, Urza Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to all of you who will make it through episode 55 of the Warp Core. Because I have to tell you, some days you love your job so much it doesn't even feel like work. And we're about to do some work. Star Trek, the Gamesters of Triskelion, is our brand new 1968 first episode. Airs on January 5th. Happy New Year, Star Trek. And unfortunately, it's all downhill from here. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We had new directors and new writers on this episode. And I'm not going to take a cheap route and say that's the reason for some dissatisfaction with it, because there was some promising background to this production crew. Gene Nelson is our new director, never been behind the camera for Trek before. And we had a woman writer, Margaret Arman, as our scripter. Now, a bit on Gene Nelson. His resume was actor, dancer, writer, and director. And he cut it as a live action Broadway performer before getting cast in movies. So he starts off on stage, singing and dancing and hoofing it. He ends up co-starring with Doris Day in The Lullaby of Broadway in 1951, one of his more famous roles. And he played Will Parker in the 1955 adaptation of Roger and Hammerstein's Oklahoma. So if not the Hugh Jackman version now, that recently was a hit revival, but go all the way back to 1955 in the original movie, motion picture, in Technicolor Dreams, and Will Parker was played by Gene Nelson. He also then went on to direct episodes of The Rifleman and I Dream of Jeannie and Gunsmoke. And he also co-wrote and directed 2 Elvis Presley pictures back when the King was making movies. He did Kissing Cousins in 1964, and that's one that he also co-wrote. And he did Harem Scarum in 1965. So if you're an Elvis fan and you remember Kissing Cousins and Harem Scarum, that's who Gene Nelson came to for the before he joined Trek. So I like his resume, and I like that he could have brought a new perspective to Star Trek. And for his first episode, it wasn't as if they didn't try to go ambitious. You can't accuse him of just doing people arguing on a bridge for 50 minutes. You know, he was staging gladiatorial combat and alien worlds and So let's give credit where credit is due. He came out swinging, but unlike Carl Weathers, the late recently lost Carl Weathers, who made his debut in Star Wars with the Mandalorian episodes, Gene didn't quite stick the landing, as we will go into. As far as Margaret Arman goes, again, a female writer, new writer, she will go on to write two more episodes of the original series and 2 episodes of the Star Trek animated series. And the best we can say there is that there's nowhere else to go but up in terms of that. She had a genre bent to her. She wrote for many years. She, following this, would go on to write $6 Million Man episodes, Bionic Woman episodes, Fantasy Island episodes. So, Margaret had a long and prosperous career. She lived long and prospered. But this was her debut effort on NCC 1701. Now, where is George Takei? Where in the world is Sulu? Because he's been conspicuously absent these past 2 episodes. Was it some sort of contract dispute? Did he get an injury or illness? No, none of these, friends. He's actually off while these episodes are being shot and edited and aired. He's actually off filming the notorious John Wayne Vietnam picture, The Green Berets, which will be released later this year in 1968. And if you're a fan of the Duke, it's not fondly remembered as one of his better efforts. And it is one of the first films, while Vietnam is raging, to be able to come to the big screen and so forth. Later on you'd have Coming Home, John Voight and Jane Fonda, and you'd have The Deer Hunter and Apocalypse Now and so forth. But this is one of the first films, in fact, probably the only film, to try and address the conflict while there are still bullets raining in Southeast Asia. But nevertheless, most people, when they look back at the Green Berets, were not terribly enthusiastic. But see if you can spot George Takei in there in a supporting role, because that's what he was doing while they were going off battling tribbles and Triskelion gladiatorial efforts. So that explains the missing Sulu. And he has been missed, because we do want our favorite helmsman to steer us out of trouble. And he might have steered us out of this one. Gentlemen, I could spend the rest of this episode taking pot shots. I'd rather hear from my fellow Starfleet officers in the ready room and let you guys set the table there. I think, let me just preview my displeasure with the episode so much is I just felt that this was one of the first times where Star Trek felt like an episode not of Star Trek, but of somebody who tried to imagine, I think I can write a good Star Trek episode, and just fell into some horrible patterns or lapsed into tropes that they didn't even realize had already sort of played out. These omniscient beings who at the snap of a finger can basically do anything they want. I think by now veteran Warp Core fans and Trekkies and so forth have realized that we've seen probably at least one too many of these, the setup. The gladiatorial combat, which I think Lord Uther will go into a little bit further here shortly, it leaves something to be desired, not even in terms of its staging, but sort of how far the envelope. Gentlemen, this is the first Star Trek episode, and I speak for myself here, where there was like an undercurrent of ugliness. Like there was this sheen of kind of sadism, or like, I'm not, this sort of glee in sort of, unpleasant imagery or so forth, whether it's Kirk getting repeatedly whipped, with the makeup scars on his back, takes you back to an unpleasant moment in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, when Indy and Short Round are getting flayed. And I want to discuss this more with the three of you, the suggestion of sexual physical violence on Uhura, again, not that it ever ultimately comes to pass, but just the willingness to use that as sort of a plot point. And I'm reminded of how they handled Uhura in Jeopardy in the Space Seed in the first season, where Khan's crew has taken over the ship and they've got them all corralled in the ready room, and Uhura stands up and has agency and talks back to the crew that are the Khan's crew, and I think one of them gives her the back of his hand and she falls, and you're like, I want to get that guy. He just hit Uhura, but they allowed her, Nichelle Nichols, and the character to kind of have her own voice. And I just found, and I think this is where the episode, firmly lost me and never got me back. The idea that this hulking sort of Adonais caveman, you will please me, or whatever his dialogue is, it was fairly insipid, like marches her off camera, and then we have a minute or two of like shadow play and some really like authentic screams. Like, it's not just the, oh no, don't come near me, you brute. Like, it sounds like what our imagination fears is happening. And they even cut to a commercial, with Kirk, shouting, "What are you doing to Uhura?" in his, and I'm sure we'll talk about the acting for William Shatner in this as well. There was just this undercurrent of, I didn't feel joy. I just felt kind of icky throughout kind of most of the episode, and I think it was that moment with Uhura that kind of sent me in that spiral. But feel free to talk me out, gentlemen. What did we think of the Three Brains and Triskelion?
Hold on a second. I'm just dialing it in like they did on this episode.
Oh, nice.
So, look, Russell Crowe couldn't even save this Gladiator episode. It was that bad. So, I mean, where do I begin? Whether it's the big caveman-looking guy who looked like Jaws, by the way, from 007
Yes.
or from James Bond.
Richard Kyle.
Getting stabbed multiple times in the stomach and just getting back up again like nothing ever happened. Those spears that they were using, you couldn't open up a crab leg with it, okay? I mean, it was that bad as well. Everything the tropes were happening, over and over. We've seen the super beings that can, again, like you said, do anything at a whim, and of course, Kirk outthinks them again. And that's what I mean by I feel like they dialed it in. We talked before in our last episode, which you can access by just clicking down below. You go backwards, go forwards, go into the future, hear our future episodes, go back in time, hear those episodes. Whatever. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But where was I at before I went off on my tangent?
You were hating on this episode.
There's so much to hate. It's bad when you hear the music that goes dun 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 dun. Like whenever you hear that music, it's their fighting music. We've got Shatner with his shirt off. They had to go back to that. This whole thing, this might be worse than Alternative Factor, and we all know how I reference that one all the time. I couldn't stand that one either. So, this is the episode, if you want someone to hate Star Trek, you show them this up. It's that simple. Urza Master, can you save this episode?
Talk us off. Talk us down.
As I've been notoriously silent, as usual, I really liked this episode. So let me start. Let's start from the top down. We have really two episodes happening here, which I particularly enjoyed, and I think it presents an interesting dichotomy, which we see in later Treks, more successfully so. But I do think what was going on here was very ambitious and very entertaining, actually. So we have a routine mission, as oft Star Trek starts with. We have an away team with a captain, an ensign, and a lieutenant. And there's a transporter perceived issue. Very common trope, but nonetheless very effective. We have a lot of Star Trek canon that has this sort of premise, and they get and all of a sudden they're on an alien planet way far away from where they ever should have been. Okay, cool. Like I'm bought in 100% right there. So I want to start with the bubble episode, which is on the Enterprise. You have Spock, McCoy, and Scotty trying to figure out what happened to the away team. And you get this really comedic interplay between those three. And this is the whole time up until they arrive at Triskelion. The whole time it's fairly comedic. Like, oh, there must have been some kind of malfunction, Scotty. Well, there's no malfunction here. Are you sure? No, but maybe. And I was like, okay, this is a little goofy. But you get the Doctor not wanting to trust Spock. You get Spock doing the logical thing and trying to, assume command and presume, hey, you guys, I'm in charge. I'm pretty sure. It's one of those, once you've eliminated all the possibilities, even the implausible ones could be the case. And Spock, again, is proven true. But the whole time you get a good measure of that sort of rest of the crew interplay that helps build their character. And I appreciate character building. Now, is a little bit, here's a one-liner punchy kind of joke and this and that, and Scotty's going to push the Enterprise a little bit faster than it should probably go. Okay, cool. All of those things I enjoy. If they were part of any other episode, I'd be like, all right, this is mildly, entertaining and successful. But again, this is a bubble portion of the episode, and I will point out that this is a Shakespearean trope in that when you have high drama or uncomfortable situations, you have to counterbalance the storytelling with some humor and some comedy. And I think that successfully happens with these cutaways to the ship. Now to Triskelion. Great premise. They show up on an alien planet. They're like, how did we get here? This doesn't seem right. This is an awkward landing. What happened? Scotty? Oh, they don't have those communicators. But, you get that. It's like, okay. And then enter, the goofy aliens of all varying races. And I get a bit of a hint of Dracula meets Manos in the Hands of Fate with our little glowing-eyed supervillain type guy who actually is not the real villain and is just a red herring. And of course, I love a good godlike being episode. I do. I'm a huge Q fan. I don't think you can do it too often. I'm going to be honest. I feel like the original series has a lot of these. Most of them are pretty good. Is this as good as a Trelane or a Charlie X? No. But it's an interesting premise. And the idea that a society would reduce itself to essentially brains in a container who have dedicated all of their powers of evolution and of being to intellectual enterprise actually tracks for me. I mean, I think that's an interesting concept. And you get the, because they're stemming from humanoids, right? You get the inherent human flaw of we need entertainment. We need some kind of drive. So, of course, they're gambling. It's a very baser human, affliction, shall we say. And if you consider of the era, gambling was a fairly prevalent issue at the time for a lot of people. Bear in mind, Las Vegas was huge at the time and rife with people with horrible gambling problems. This is the era of broken kneecaps and people like gambling away their mortgages and all sorts of stuff in a very mafia-heavy era. So like this is fresh in the minds of people who are consuming this at the time. So I like that idea that could be taken to the umpteenth degree and result in gladiatorial combat, which is another Roman callback that works for me. It makes sense. Why did Rome fall? They were trying to distract themselves with games. Why did this, three-brain civilization go awry? They got to the point where they were so powerful they had to find a distraction for themselves. Gladiatorial combat. And how did they do it? Slavery. I mean, it's just a story of Rome. So I really like that. I love the concept of it. They have an Andorian. They have this weird like caveman dude, which of course you're going to get like the big strong guys. You're going to get people with, unique abilities. You also get the love interest for Kirk, which I think they almost go a little meta here, and they give you the same kind of thing for Chekhov. But it's very uncomfortable for Chekhov because he gets sort of the big Russian woman, right? The sort of like, we get it with Rocky IV. The woman next to Ivan Drago, who's like kind of manly herself. Now, granted, it's of the era. Take it with a grain of salt. The gender expression. I'm not pointing anything about that. I'm a true ally and believer there. But I will say it's comedic for its time, and it plays pretty well because obviously it's uncomfortable, and the whole premise of freedom versus slavery in this episode is basically the uncomfortability of it. It wants you to be uncomfortable. The whole time you're supposed to feel uncomfortable with what's going on. Because look, if they play the game, right, and they're obedient, they get everything they want. They get ostensibly a mate, they get food, they get water, shelter, and all they have to do is amuse their captors. That doesn't really seem so bad. It's kind of like the Harry Mudd situation where it could be a utopia controlled by robots. I mean, frankly, it's the same idea. However, in this case, you get the naive alien girl who doesn't understand space travel. How does one live on a blinking light? I think that's a wonderful line. I really think that's excellent writing. I mean, to paint the naivete of an alien that doesn't know anything about anything, especially when the captors are these incredibly enlightened beings that can do anything with their minds, fantastic. Not to mention the fact this is really the first time Kirk has like a alien love interest that he actually sort of has feelings for, but he still does his duty. He still knocks her out to kind of execute the plan to escape and all this. I got throwbacks to the movie Fortress with the little collars that can kill you. I thought that was cool. I love Fortress, so that was like an awesome callback for me. Obviously, they borrowed that idea. I love the idea of, they're trying to breed obedience and instill it in people. Now, the Uhura rape scene, let's call it what it is, that was extraordinarily uncomfortable for me. I didn't like that. And I don't think you're supposed to. I think it is the safest way they could portray the true horrors of slavery, particularly real slavery, which I think is always a commentary Roddenberry and some of these writers are trying to convey. And, I hate to say it, but Nichelle Nichols just happened to be the black actor on the show. This is kind of real life. I mean, you're supposed to feel really terrible about what you're hearing and seeing. And the sheer concern and frustration on William Shatner's face, was it acted very well? Not really. But it was definitely shooting for the moon there. And it went on long enough for you to feel really deeply uncomfortable with what's happening. But you should. And that's why right after that it blips back to the Enterprise. Because it's like, all right, we just put them through hell. We got to give them something to cleanse the palate. I actually think that's kind of masterful writing. Because if you're really trying to paint this as like, this is horrific. How are they going to get out of this? That's the way to do it. Now, outsmarting the godlike being. Kirk always does this, so you know it's happening. You know it's gonna go down somehow. I liked it. It's not exactly Deus Ex Machina. It's just predictable, and it is a trope. But I'm down with that. This is what Captain Kirk does. He's the man. This is how he gets shit done. But he comes up with a solution that doesn't involve just like brute force or like just escaping, and putting up a buoy like don't come to this planet. And he sets people free. This is the emancipation of this, enslaved people. Like, this is kind of awesome. It's just not executed as well as I'd hope. The one thing that really bothered me about this episode, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, was that they set down the ground rules that Kirk has to stay in the yellow, the other three have to stay in the green, and within seconds, Kirk has stepped all over the green and doesn't get any kind of punishment. They're like, you lose a weapon if you step outside your color. I'm like, he just stepped outside of the color like 8 times. Like, we could take away his arms and legs. Like, the fight choreography was awful. And I got shades of Troll 2 when I saw somebody, like, standing there and then a thrown spear, and then they're like, ah! Okay, that's where it started to lose me a little bit. But the fact that, he wounds one of them, and they say, we're going to put in a fresh, I forget what they called the slaves, but
Thrall.
we're going to put somebody fresh in, and yes, Thrall, and he has to fight his girlfriend, for lack of a better term, and opts not to kill her, and she relents, she gives up. Although they're like, you can only be removed by death, and it's like, well, wait a minute, she gave up, and they're like, well, you win, Kirk. Like, they just sort of like ran out of time. I had a little problem with that too, but I think for 1960s TV, like, he couldn't kill the love interest. It wasn't going to happen, and that's not Kirk. I like that she couldn't kill him either. There was a little bit of that. And, at the end, it's like, take me with you. I can't. You have to stay here and learn because you're kind of a dumb broad. I need you to learn some things before I take you with me. All right, that was a little bit like, really? But, in a way, it was kind of nice because, they had to have somebody there to be freed because they literally killed off, 3 other characters. So it's her and Vampire Man and, I don't know, the other guy. Was it the strongest episode? No. But I do really feel strongly that this gets a little bit of unfair hate. I think you get a little bit of the Desilu music, you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but is it as bad as the alternative factor? I don't think so. Is it as bad as the Apple or Adonais? I also don't think so. I think this is just kind of a, it's a maybe a par for the course entry for your first episode of a new year.
If I have to think that much about an episode, that scares me. And let me know when that check from Paramount clears for you, because holy cow, did you just talk up that episode? Woo!
Ladies and gentlemen of the Warp Core
hire
fans,
this guy, Paramount. You are missing out. You got to hire this dude.
Yes.
He's got to get in the story room, like everything.
You will not see a more spirited defense of any classic Star Trek episode than what you just witnessed. And I hope you're still with us here to have heard that. That was amazing. I mean, I truly that is there. I'd like to do the mirror version of Lord Uther's favorite call and response. No. But I'm not going to sit here and refute you point by point. I will shortly say what I thought of your presentation when we do our warp course. You reminded me that Kirk, like, his big solution was to punch her in the face, which again, I was in a death spiral of this. I agree with you. I will take your interpretation for what it's worth, and it's worth a lot. That we're supposed to feel uncomfortable, that the Uhura scene is supposed to horrify us. I get that. I just felt that in the context in which it was offered, it was just a really, for me, it didn't land with, well, this was the underpinnings of slavery and we should confront that face on. I just thought that they were using it as a gratuitous plot excuse to show us how, I don't know. I guess I've evolved, and maybe I wouldn't have noticed this when I was in my teens or 20s or so forth, but the idea that we would place a female character in that kind of jeopardy simply to score plot points, like, oh, these guys are bad, look what they're doing to Uhura. That's how it read for me on first blush, and perhaps I would need to rewatch it. Good luck there. In order to fully buy into your interpretation, but that does not undersell your interpretation at all, Urza Master, and that's why you're an essential member of Starfleet Command. You've already referenced Fortress and Troll 2, which I'm sure Warp Core fans will realize, 2 very deep cuts. I'd like to add Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Running Man in 1987, yes, which also had shock collars and it even got us so far as the head exploding briefly on camera, which was a biggie for Reagan's America. But that's also, we would be unjust not throwing The Running Man in there with Troll 2 and Fortress. I think that's a powerful trio that would match any brains and so forth. And I mean, Shauna, despite looking like a refugee from the glorious ladies of wrestling, with her hair and makeup and so forth. I wanted to root for those crazy kids, but Angelique Pettyjohn, who played there, I believed it when Kirk fell for in the city of on the edge of forever. I believe when Joan Collins, like sort of captured his heart and left a scar there. I just didn't imagine that 10 minutes after they broke orbit, that Kirk was going to remember Shauna or have any kind of, like I say, she's no Carol Marcus. And I think there was a little bit of an attempt to try to give her more emotional weight than she probably deserved based on how she was being presented to us. Like that element to me, I'm always a sucker for a good love story, but that one just felt a little forced. Like he would go for the woman in the hot pants and the green hair and so forth. Like I felt he was, especially when he hit her in the chin, I felt like she was just a means to an end rather than any kind of serious romantic entanglement. So, but I mean, we've probably reached that point where we can do the warp cores, and I'm on a roll here. So I want to go out and give Urza Master to all our viewers and warp core fans and pending rebranders. I want to give Urza Master 7 out of 7 warp cores for the thoughtful, erudite analysis that he did. He came prepared. He had receipts. He may have had a lone, unpopular vision amongst this Starfleet trio, but by goodness, I believe it. I believe that he believes it, and I think he did an absolutely academic, stellar job of showing why this episode does not deserve the scorn that 2 of his fellow shipmates are casting upon it. That being said, Urza Master gets 7 out of 7 warp cores, and I'm not even going to deign to rate this one. I know that Lord Uther has his own method when we get to these depths, and I'll let his rating speak for mine in this case. But Urza Master walks away at the top, warp factor 10, 7 warp cores out of 7. That was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant.
Hey, he can have all the receipts in the world. I'm still auditing him for that entire thing. So, love you, but I'll see you in my IRS office. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to go 1 + 1 = 3, and I will give this 3 warp cores. I'm just being generous. So, is it alternative factor? No, I still hate that episode. So, because of Urza Master's wonderful soliloquy, I don't even know what that means. I'm just using the term.
It's Shakespearean.
Did I really?
Yes, good job.
Look at what I did. Just because of that, I will give it 3 warp cores. So, somewhere, some things he said touched my heart and made me see this just a little bit differently.
And
Urza Master. Oh yes.
Yeah, no,
oh,
I was going to say his defense is exactly the same way that I would approach a different science fiction fantasy, and I'm sure I will be the lone voice of reason as you watch those graying Jedi on the council, which is also a big part of our pending rebrand strategy here on our website and YouTube and so forth. I speak for Urza Master there. Like, you will drag me through the cold fires of Triskelion before you get me to utter a harsh syllable about the various Star Wars forms, including prequels and sequels and midichlorians and force dyads and all of that, which, again, I fully expect to be... I hope I can do as good a job defending some of the Star Warsian elements as Urza Master just did eloquently and just from the heart. And I want everyone to realize this. Like, this isn't just 3 guys sitting around in their man caves, casting darts from up on high. Oh, look at us, the superior intellect. we're fans, right? And sometimes as fans, there are things that annoy us or get in the way of enjoyment or anger us or confuse us. But in the same breath, we're not just blind-eyed drinking the Kool-Aid, slaves to it. This really comes from the heart. And if you don't believe that all of us, care about Star Trek and its franchise and its future and its characters, well, I mean, then we'll do a better job, because I think we certainly communicate that. And I think Urza Master stands a podium length ahead of where I could be considered a Star Trek fan. And I respect the heck out of it, because, like I say, that was the best description of a bad episode that I think you'll ever hear.
Well,
and that's why you tune in. That's why you tune into the Warp Core and pending rebrand and so forth,
well,
because this was
hear me now.
seminal stuff.
Hear me now and believe me later. When we get to those Star Wars episodes, your cracked kyber crystals will not hold any weight when I go to totally slice you up on that one. With that, Urza Master, please
Yes.
enlighten us like you did before.
Well, when it comes to the Gamesters of Triskelion, I do not feel this is a foundational episode of Star Trek. I think it is an ambitious episode. I think it's entertaining. I have a hard time separating myself from my love of skimpy silver outfits and buxom ladies, but I do think it was academically speaking enlightened and definitely deserved maybe a remake. Maybe this is one that deserves a remake in the future of Star Trek. I will say that as a fan, I tend to, well, actually I say just in general, I tend to be a little more rose-tinted glasses about everything. So often my opinions are colored by the fact that I want to find something good about something. It's a problem. I'm working on it. And as a matter of fact, I will say that I have stood on the stand in defense of the indefensible before. I have a very famous story about a certain mock trial of a certain dictator in school where you all had to pick your role in a courtroom prosecution of said dictator. I won't mention the name. And nobody wanted to be the defense attorney except the person that wasn't there that day, and successfully defended this person, something I'm not proud of. So when it comes to defending the indefensible,
You're the guy.
That being said, I give this episode a solid 4 out of 7 warp cores. I like it. It's enjoyable. I think it does some ambitious things. I think it falls short of the mark in a few key ways. But it's certainly, if somebody said, hey, I'm going to watch Triskelion and Tribbles today, I'd say, okay, buckle up. You're going to really love one, and the other one you'll probably go, it's Star Trek, right? That being said, for 55 episodes into the Warp Core podcast, I don't think we could have picked a better spot to make a quick pit stop on our NCC 1701 journey with the Gamesters of Triskelion. I will say live long and prosper to all of you out there who made it with us on this journey, and we will continue next week. Enjoy.